Hi, my name is Bob Ponce. I am the co-moderator of the Black People in Cryptocurrency group on Facebook. I've been a cryptocurrency investor since 2013. And today's panel is called Enter the Metaverse, the life and pursuit. Let's see, what was I gotta look. The Pursuit of Life and Liberty. Beautiful title. And I'm pleased to have as my guest on this panel, Ryan Robinson. I'm going to give you a portion of his bio because if I read the whole bio, all our time would be up. But Ryan is a visionary who's creating quantum technology to change the world. He's the CEO of Conduit Inc., a startup he founded while a student at MIT. He's the world's first quantum engineer by degree, and his startup Conduit uses high-powered computing to create for home use medical devices and treatments. He was born in Miami and started taking college classes at Harvard at age 15. After being accepted to MIT, he began researching dark matter at age 18. And after studying under Eric Lander, the father of the Human Genome Project, he created a company called Conduit, which is dedicated to using computers to create products that solve the world's biggest problems. And he did this while still a student at MIT. And at 22, he was featured in Forbes for Conduit's work in solving real world problems. And he's also lectured at MIT about quantum computer and cryptocurrency. So, Ryan, welcome to the Black Blockchain Summit.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
So I want to start our talk about the metaverse with the end in mind. Because this is a Black Blockchain Summit, I think it's appropriate that at the end of our discussion, we at least have some indication of um, how the metaverse can positively or negatively affect the people, culture, and history of the African diaspora. So that's the road we want to get down. But at the beginning, I'd like us to just talk about what is the metaverse. So I want to ask you to just kind of give a brief definition of kind of what you feel the metaverse is.
Yeah, absolutely. And first, let me say it's a question that I think about a lot, obviously from a blockchain perspective, from a quantum computing perspective, because a lot of it's similar questions involved in terms of what's the future going to look like. For me, I define the metaverse as really an extension of our current state of the internet, where we're transferring our more of our interactions in less from a physical space, physical to physical, and now into a virtual to virtual, a V2V type interactions, with obviously a more visual component that simulates some aspects of the physical reality. So long story short, metaverse as I see it, again, is a more a virtual world that simulates more aspects of the physical reality that we all live in.
Mhm. And yeah, I kind of thought about this a little bit as just preparing for this panel because I had to ask myself, well, this
Right.
term has been thrown around, and I thought about the fact that from the beginning of the history of data science and processing, which actually goes back to the abacus, which is like 2700
Yeah.
BC.
Right.
We've always proceeded in ways to improve the technology that the data processing side interfaces with humans in a better, real and better way. So we went from the abacus to computer punch cards, which I didn't know till I looked this up. So I don't want to pretend that I'm this smart, but Wikipedia helped me out on this. So computer punch cards, which basically built the IBM Corporation, that technology was actually invented in the 1800s, believe it or not, and really came into being in the 1900s and literally built IBM into what was at that point in time the number one technology company in the world by far. And then advances and processing, got magnetic tape and all these other developments. And then came the internet, which is like, okay, so we had this HTML, hypertext markup language, which is just a technologically difficult way to say that we're able to now collect both text, images, and then video and sound and the HTML acts as a point guard to make all of those modes available, so that now we're not just interacting with text, but we can see images, we can see video, we can see music. And now with the advances of mobile computing, it got to us to the point where we're now carrying it all around in our hand. And the next generation is obviously this generation where we bring in, VR, virtual reality, and augmented reality. So we're going beyond all of those kind of static interactions into something where we're going into a world that is kind of like the way we take in data as humans, which is we see, we hear, we feel. We haven't quite got smell and taste into this mode yet, but we've got, most of the major senses that we operate in, and we're being able to take that and directly connect that into this computer network world that we live in. So that being the case, um, and I also want to mention that we know that the company that it now calls itself Meta, formerly Facebook, has tried to maybe hijack the definition. And so their definition is very centric to VR headsets because they own a VR headset company. So how do you see, because you have a broad view of technology that goes beyond kind of a hyper specific and profit oriented view of it. So how do you view, I mean, are we just talking about adding VR headsets to what we already have, or is there something more to this interaction that we call the metaverse?
Oh man, so really you're gonna see in the 21st century a revolution in what a computer really is, and
Mm-hmm.
thereby how we interact with computers.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of it going from, of course, like you just documented, from big to small, mechanical to electrical, you're talking about analog, etc. You're talking about miniaturized technology now, technology on your your wrists, etc. Now, of course, you're talking about technology that is at its core is really going to be totally different from what we've imagined. And so we're assuming this, of course, that will require companies and governments and the whole coalition of stakeholders really pushing that forward. But in short, it's pretty clear that it's going to be beyond headsets. It's going to be beyond headsets. So, for instance, you could have it where you have a ball, right? And you have a ball, and you drop the ball on the floor, and the ball opens up, and now you're in a virtual sphere, right? So there's really, really profound things that can happen. And I think a lot of that is going to depend, of course, like you said, on the physical hardware, the physical technology that then enables this virtual technology. And that can go very, very deep. I mean, just already kind of starting that little thread. I mean, you could say that our physical bodies, right, are interfaces for a more higher plane of existence, and going back to whomever you want to talk about, the Hindus, ancient Hindu, the Bhagavad Gita, this idea of my point being of a virtual reality. Well, it goes back, many, many, many years, but it's usually the opposite way around. So right now we're talking about, of course, where the physical reality is sort of the default state, and then the virtual reality will be the sort of newer reality, this fake reality. While if you go back in religion, it's the same thing but inverted, where the physical reality we inhabit, of course, is sort of the fakeness, it's the void, or rather the illusion, excuse me. And so that's really interesting. So it adds another layer on top of that. But again, to summarize to your specific question, is that no, definitely headsets are not going to be the end all be all. I mean, it's really going to be really dramatic. And I think product designers, product managers, artists, this is a huge opportunity for them to really collaborate with technologists, become technologists themselves, and again, redefine not only this virtual reality, but the physical interfaces, the physical hardware that would create and manifest these virtual realities.
And accompanying this kind of buzz around the metaverse, there's always this interesting dance with popular culture, and this is the year of multiverse movies. And so Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Michelle Yeoh, everybody is talking about the multiverse. And I don't want to laugh those things off because we've already seen how our science, so-called fiction, predicts and points toward what has become science fact. So is there anything you see in kind of the popular multiverse buzz that gives us some clues about ways that we can kind of develop the metaverse into something useful for us in the so-called real world?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'm personally a fan in this context because it answered those questions for me. Is Ready Player One? I thought that was a cool
Hmm.
movie. It wasn't super innovative from what it demonstrated inside the virtual reality, but I think it did a good job of demonstrating, I think, the stakeholder conflict that you're going to have. Because under the movie, I won't spoil it obviously, but is it sure? I mean, you kind of have the individual player, and then you have this sort of big corporate company, that's been around, and they're all over, and they're like this huge, megalith of influence, and the virtual reality becomes this battleground, right? Again, between labor versus capital, individual versus the company. So that part I found really interesting. Again, in terms of stakeholder conflict. Any the thing about humans, we have a hard time getting along. And even if you live with somebody in the real world, it's hard. Whether it be your brother, your mom, your sister, your twin. It's challenging. And so any space that we kind of we bring our consciousness into, we assert ourselves in, whether it be space, whether it be physical land, Antarctica, even. There's tends to be a bit of a conflict. So I think you're going to see that as a part of the pop culture for sure. And I think you're also going to see it as a challenge for these governments to really keep pace with what the technology is, how to regulate it, and it both, in terms of a taxation perspective, as well as in terms of, for the safety of whomever it may be, kids, whomever. And I think you've seen that, bring it back to sort of the roots of the organization with blockchain. Is governments, either stifling innovation, promoting innovation through their regulatory powers, for good or for bad. And so what you're going to see is huge phase of experimentation, where I imagine the United States will probably, no, the United States will probably be a little bit slow, There'll probably be companies that get there first, and they're innovating on top of each other, and boom, 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 boom. The government's 5-10 years behind. It'll probably be the SEC and IRS will probably be the first. Hey, wait, how do we tax this? What's going on? You bought a virtual good. How do we? That'll probably be one of the first or agencies to really grab hold of it mentally, conceptually. Um, and then, of course, I think you'll probably see it as well, eventually, in terms of even like a military aspect. As these things in the virtual world start to have significance in the physical world, things that start in the virtual world having significance in the physical world. So you're gonna see government involved in this for sure. And I think obviously with the over 200 countries in the world, recognized countries in the world, is it's basically going to be an example of what the founding fathers talked. We talked about life and liberty. Founding fathers talked about when they created the idea or fostered the idea of federalism in this
Hmm.
country, which was the idea that different states would be sort of testing grounds for different policies. I think you're going to see the same thing, but again on a global level. On a global level.
And how do you see quantum computing enter, what is the effect that this quantum
Oh
computing is
man,
going to have on the development of the
oh man.
metaverse?
I've actually been begging for someone to ask me this question.
Glad
Yeah,
to
because
help.
it's so exciting because right now quantum computing it's just it's we were talking about it's very limited by the stakeholders, by the incentive structure that we are now, and it's very sort of myopic.
Hmm.
It's not very imaginative on a higher level. I mean, people definitely are, you definitely have pioneers. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying in terms of what makes progress, it's very sort of traditional in thinking. You've got geopolitics, you've got cryptography, sort of the obvious stuff, drug discovery, and at least to me, it's obvious. Anyone who kind of studies this stuff, it was some of the first examples. I mean, Shor's algorithm for cryptography. So I'll break that down for people that don't know. Shor's algorithm is really the first major use case for quantum computing, and technically hypothetical. And what it does is it breaks down RSA encryption. RSA encryption, for those who don't know, is basically the sort of the standard encryption protocol, the standard um, lock and key approach that the internet uses. So if you want to secure something, you use RSA encryption, generally speaking. And what my point is that Shor's algorithm, the first use case for quantum computing, said, hey, here's how we can break into practically any safe on the internet, to keep it very, 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 very simple.
Hmm.
That, created a huge explosion of interest, and particularly in the last 10 years or so, again, on a geopolitical level, number one. You've seen on a drug discovery level with pharma companies and biomedical fields, they still quite haven't figured out what exactly to do with it. But that was already clear because the foundations of it, speaking to 1980 here at MIT, was Richard Feynman. There was some people before him, but he was sort of the one that really made it a thing. He didn't call it quantum computers; he called it universal simulator, a universal simulator. And I think that that's going to be important later on. And this is my point: is that he was talking about in the context of physics experiments, simulating physics experiments, which it then immediately translates over to chemistry experiments immediately. So the drug discovery part is my point is the drug discovery part isn't really that profound of a leap of thought. Oh well, we can simulate physics. Well, then the next obvious thought, at least for me, was drug discovery. Even though that was in 1980, 81, and now we're here in 2022, and they're still trying to kind of figure it out. And so you got that going on. But bring it obviously to the question, which is how does quantum computing affect augmented reality, metaverse, which is more VR, virtual reality, is that going back to what I said, Richard Feynman, that's the reason I brought him up, universal simulator, universal simulator. My advisor at MIT, Seth Lloyd, has a book called Program the Universe, where he talks about how the universe itself is a quantum computer computing itself, running its data, processing its data. And so I bring that up to say that quantum computing has this huge minefield, or mine, excuse me, of possibility and opportunities, and using quantum computing to simulate a lot of these virtual realities. Specifically, what I'm saying is that quantum computers are these very, at least in the hypothetical, are very powerful processing tools, very, very powerful. Now, currently, they are mainly used for probabilistic type things. They're not necessarily used for stuff like what we're talking about. You would kind of need more of like a quantum AWS almost, something that can host things, right? That can maintain things. It sort of can maintain your virtual reality app, if you will. Right now, it's used again for more computational, calculations, 2+2, 4+4, etc. But my point being is that quantum computers, in their ability to simulate, because from a certain perspective, the universe is a quantum computer, means that there's a huge potential for quantum computers to simulate these virtual realities as these huge data processing machines. And not only that, but to be able to do it in an energy efficient manner. Right now, the major use case for quantum computing is actually, funny enough, not just on the sort of software algorithm, financial, drug discovery, cryptographic approach, but just on an energy usage. So you right now, say you've got a huge data center, is a quantum computer to you is a very, very attractive idea because it uses 100, sometimes even 1,000 times less energy. My point being is that we're talking about virtual reality is going to use much more data, much more data. And so quantum computers really come in again two different ways. One is the sheer amount of data they can process, and finally, number two is the energy usage in processing that data. So finally, what I suspect we'll see with augmented reality, virtual reality devices, once we start getting into that futuristic, like we're talking about sci-fi world, is you're probably going to have hybrid systems that use classical computing, and then parts that use quantum computing, and that follows in the history of computing as well. I mean, the first computers were not electrical. Of course, they were. You said the abacus, and so there was a certain point, especially talking about the 1930s, 1940s, even especially at MIT. We were talking about Cloud Shannon and that time period where, again, these machines were hybrid. They were part mechanical, part electrical. So again, I think in our transition over to this new reality, new meta reality, is going to be these hybrid systems of classical and quantum, again, because the quantum adds an advantage, number one, in terms of data processing, and two, in energy efficiency.
Mm-hmm. So, let's talk a little bit about the potential downsides for all this, because, one of my pet peeves about, and I love technology, but I always feel like, we always have glowing discussions about the potential future, and the downsides never show up in those discussions. Especially, look, we live in a world where technology gets funded through, primarily through venture capital. And it's interesting because a lot of the really good stuff that we have came from open source, and the idea, a lot of technologists really do have this egalitarian view that the technology should be available to everyone and shared. And certainly we wouldn't have the internet that we have as a base for all this without that type of view. But, once it comes into the venture sphere, then it all becomes about, well, how do we create addressable markets, and
Yeah.
how can we capture market share? How can we create the platform that everyone builds on, like Meta is trying to do? So going forward from here, let's take off the rose-colored glasses and let's look at the crap-colored glasses and see what is the potential downside for this, whether it be resource allocation, because certainly going forward, this is a bandwidth-intensive use of technology. And as we bringing it back to Black Blockchain Summit, whether we're talking about urban cities in America, or you're talking about African countries or Caribbean countries that don't have the type of bandwidth or communications infrastructure, how do we make sure that the development of the metaverse we want to see is inclusive for all those populations?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's yeah, so no, you were spot on too. It was funny. And in terms of the negative aspects of something, of course, it's humans. We you give us a pencil, right? We can write, a beautiful play, a Shakespeare play, or we can stab somebody with it. We're just with eight
Absolutely.
billion,
A tool
with
or
eight
a weapon.
billion,
Yep.
yeah. So, and with 8 billion of us, this is what I think something I think about too is that, so Bob, is to think about if you have 8 billion people, right? That
Hmm.
means in any, arbitrary period of time, let's just say, to keep it very simple, let's say in 1 second, everyone thinks one thought,
Hmm.
one, one thought in 1 second. So that means in 1 second, just like that, there's been 8 billion thoughts. So, the simplification, but to get my point across, is that, so say in what might take you 8 billion seconds to think, right? Someone in the world over here thought that random thought. Obviously, a lot of those thoughts are similar. What am I going to eat? And I can't wait to get home. Oh man, I hate this job. You have those similar thoughts. But my point being is that if you're talking about possibilities, my point is that in every second, in this example, there's 8 billion possibilities of thought. And so when you're talking about something like, of course, metaverse and virtual reality, I mean, the possibilities are endless for good and for bad. Specifically, let's talk about from the user perspective for a second, is that so much of our technology actually ends up hurting us. Let's talk from that, like I said, from our physical perspective. For instance, our phones, they radiate and they actually can cause damage to us. There's studies even if the phone is in the room, people don't sleep as well. There's studies how the radiation of your phone can actually hurt your brain, can affect your brain processing power, and it goes, list goes on and on and on. But even cars. I mean, pollution is the obvious example. We have the even plastic silverware. The plastic gets in our food, and then so it affects our bodies. So it's really I think, and speaking to that, especially that point where you were saying about the VC aspect, is that you see this with plastic pollution right now. Is that if you talk to an industrial engineer, petrochemical engineer, they can tell you 10 different ways to use plastics. But in terms of the effects of the plastic on the body, you'll find this lack of research, ironically, right, on how exactly does it affect the body. But again, a million different use cases on how to use it to make money, to profit off of it, to scale, like you said. And I'm using the example of pollution in that example. But I think that's going to be a challenge for people. Is so say, that new device comes out that really, really pushes the frontier. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be awesome. But there's going to also be a question of, okay, well, how is this affecting the thing between my ears? How is this affecting my brain? And a lot of people are not going to ask that question. A lot of people are not going to care because maybe won't even know to ask those types of questions, because there's just so much going on now in the 21st century in terms of technology. It's kind of hard to keep track of how this is affecting you, how that's affecting you. I mean, even being indoors, the lack of vitamin D, even the material used in the, asbestos. That's an easy example. But if you're not really in that mindset of questioning these things, I think that's a benefit that technologists have. Why obviously you invited me to be on the panel is we're constantly questioning these things. You can't really innovate if you haven't understood what's come before you, else you're just recreating. You're just recreating. So you're gonna have that aspect where, again, that the physical effects of the technology honestly will probably not be understood for a while. They're not going to be funded by many people because they don't, the companies don't want you to know. You can see that even for like the plant-based meats that are out now. It's like there are all these effects. So you got that, number one. Number two, going now to the actual the user in terms of the experience of it. This is obvious, but I mean, you're going to have the whole social media thing. Again. So you're gonna have people who say you're dating someone, so forth and so on in the physical reality, but they got a whole nother family in the virtual reality. They might be dating someone totally different. Catfishing gonna be a whole nother game now. So you're gonna have that experience, and of course you're gonna have people that just prefer to live in that virtual reality more. An example of this. For those who are into anime, it's called Sword Art Online. It's a show. It's a famous TV show, Bob. Well, long story short, these people. Well, it actually goes back to the corporate part, but these people they wear headsets. So going back to what we were talking about, headsets, and it takes them to this virtual reality. Long story short, they can't take off the virtual reality headset. It's this really crazy thing. They can't take it off, and they're stuck. They're physically stuck.
So it's
And
really like a Matrix 1.0.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
In this Japanese cartoon version of it,
Mm-hmm.
built in the context of a sort of a video game as a pretext.
Mm-hmm.
And long story short, obviously their physical bodies deteriorate, number one, and number two, you get people who are like, well, hey, so there's these people that get married in the virtual reality, and then it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a question: well, are you really married? So you're gonna start to have these questions of legality. What does something happening in the virtual reality qualify for something in the physical reality? If I see you in the virtual reality and I throw and I say slurs at you, does that qualify as a hate crime in physical reality?
Mm-hmm.
So you're gonna have that type of stuff as well. Privacy as well. Is that will the courts have rights to subpoena the data from your virtual persona, your virtual conversations? You're gonna have so definitely a huge question talking about life and liberty,
Mm-hmm.
and now bring it to the last point. I'm talking a lot is that the companies like you brought up. I want to bring it back to that point. In this show, Sword Art Online, the company designed it that way. They said, "Oh well, haha, we got you. You're stuck in this." Now this guy he's like a crazy, kind of a nerd gone wrong type thing. It's not like strictly the VC route, but
Mm-hmm.
point being is that you're going to have these companies going to have even more power over us, and it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
diverted. Even though in reality, to bring it back to what you said, it's honestly it's really going to depend on so many tools, development kits that are really going to be developed by people that like our internet pioneers. They did for free. I mean, the Linux system, for instance, is the easy example, easiest
Mm-hmm.
example we can think. I mean, even blockchain, right? The guy made
Right.
it. We don't even know if it's a guy. It's Satoshi. It's
Right.
anonymous.
Right.
These people, really end up fostering this. But I think that what I would encourage those people to do who are, they just want to do it for egalitarian purposes. And I'm this, very similar, is that there's a quote by MLK that I love where it says, "Where peace will not happen until those who organize for peace organize as effectively as those who organize for war." For war.
Wow, that's profound, and I think that's very relevant. And it goes back to my original question about we have this company Meta that has literally done a whole branding around their, entering their version of the metaverse, and yeah, obviously creating their platform as the one platform to, of all platforms. Is there anything we see on the horizon that is a counter to that, that is more like the open blockchain or the open internet that we have, where we can have peer-to-peer interactions that are not centralized.
Oh man, yeah. There's of course entire communities, devoted to this on sort of the subreddits and stuff like that, and
Mm-hmm.
the open source community. I think the challenge though is because there isn't really. I mean, even we know that Meta is definitely not the clear winner of this. I know they're doing it for the marketing, but we know that the race hasn't even really even begun. This is
Mm-hmm.
beginning of the beginning of the beginning of the beginning. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and then even still, even if you're the first, right, that doesn't mean you're gonna be the best or the one that stays. I mean, we all remember AOL with the
Mm-hmm.
dial-up. You remember
Right,
Internet Explorer?
exactly.
You
When
know,
AOL had the bigger market capitalization than Time Warner,
yep,
and now both those companies are gone.
yeah, Yahoo. Remember, you had to find something on Yahoo. Remember those days?
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yep, yep. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, fortunately, I mean, like any sort of new frontier, it opens up our opportunities for these new companies to come in and innovate and make their mark. I think, of course, is that you do risk them, like you see now. I don't know if you remember, but in 2006, 2007, remember Facebook was like the cool thing. That was like
Mm-hmm.
cool. And then, fast forward 2016, what, 10 years later, it's like,
Right.
oh,
It becomes your parents and grandparents' social media platform, and you have a whole generation of young people who wouldn't be seen, caught dead on Facebook, for loss of social capital.
right, exactly. And so that's going to be a really interesting part is I think the real company that's going to come in is you're going to see some of these paradigms repeat. An example being, just going back to what you just said, is you're going to have that kind of Apple versus IBM, PC versus Mac type dynamic, right?
Mm-hmm.
That speaks to these generational attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because now we have generations marked. I say, in history, it's like generations are marked just by 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now our generations are marked by, the technology, the TV shows. They're
Mm-hmm.
very corporate based generations.
Mm-hmm.
Where, even for me, if I meet someone who's like 5 years younger, 6 years younger, they're like in a different world than me. You
Mm-hmm.
know, historically, it was really more in these kind of 20-year blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Having generations marked by technology, and so that's going to be really interesting. That's going to be really interesting. So you got that going on. But again, I think it's going to come down to those type of open source people that are really going to make the tools to move this forward. And I think it's going to be the same motifs. I mean, as that's driven all of our innovation before. So me as a technologist, when we were talking about, how do we make the future and what's going on, I always bring it back to psychology, and I bring it back specifically to Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
Those hierarchy of needs. We're talking about, of course, food. You're talking about shelter, the feeling of being loved.
Mm-hmm.
Self-fulfillment, existential. All that type of stuff. Fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really going to be a framework that will be able to encapsulate a lot of the innovation you're going to see.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so for example, very easy example, shopping. So I could make a company today, and call it, I don't know, VR shopping. To keep it simple, and you put on this headset, right, and it allows you to shop in a virtual grocery store,
Mm-hmm.
and check out that they deliver it to you. Same thing for real estate, fashion, etc. So you're going to see these human. The thing about humans is, even we don't really change that. Everything changes, but everything stays the same at the same time.
Right, because
Yeah,
we still, at the end of the day, still have the human interface. We see, we hear, we touch, we feel, we taste. We have desires for social interaction. We have these creative expression that we want to do, and we've created culture around those things that goes in a variety of different ways. So I want to bring it back to what the opportunities are for the diaspora, whether we're talking about telemedicine, whether we're talking about education, whether we're talking about culture. There's definitely some areas where we can so-called take the high ground.
yeah,
So maybe some of your thoughts on that.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, well, one, starting off with a quote by Audre Lorde, is that there can be no liberation without community, without
Mm-hmm.
community. And I think that how well we are able to utilize technologies like the metaverse is going to come down to how well we support each other, And really, what I've been seeing, I don't know, Bob, you've been seeing, but for me personally, in my space, I've been seeing a lot of Pan-Africanism, diasporism, if what you want to call it that,
Mm-hmm.
where there is starting to be this larger identity that I think opens up for more collaboration, more unity, more wealth creation, everything,
Mm-hmm.
stronger family structures potentially, and so that's been really great on the physical side. I think in
Mm-hmm.
terms of specifically, obviously your question about the metaverse is that looking at traditionally the history of African Americans in the United States, just talking about just from that thread and moving forward, is that, I mean, if you look at music, I'm gonna use I love music, so I'm gonna use that as a segue. If you look at jazz, if you look at even the Beatles will say, they were exposed to that type of music by black
Mm-hmm.
musicians. The first one to say this.
Mm-hmm.
And so rock and roll, all these different forms. So I think from a creative aspect, from a innovative aspect, even the Matrix, when I've read, has been by some people credited to a black woman that wrote the original script.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's how true that is. I haven't had the time to research that, but that's what I've seen articles about that. My point being is that with the metaverse, I see, and the most obvious thing is people of color, people of children of the diaspora, really being the innovators. Number one, and I think
Mm-hmm.
number two, Bob, I know you know this, but I think our challenge is going to be on the capital side. I'm going to be
Right.
on these ideas, scaling these ideas without, giving so much of the um, financial rewards of this off to that
Mm-hmm.
traditional VC path. I think that's going to be number one. Well, I'll stop there because I think you want to say something.
Well, that obviously goes right back into your wheelhouse, because that's a very real world problem that you have to solve in your business right now. Is how do you take, you have these tremendously creative ideas, and you're blessed to have a fairly specific vision of how to implement it, but it still requires that capital. So based on your experiences, looking at the metaverse, looking at some of the ideas we have on how we can create a part of that metaverse, or maybe all of it, that we own the platforms that we connect on, or at least they're being shared, open, distributed platforms, which would level the playing field and basically give the edge to the innovators. So
Yeah.
so based on your real world today experience about that, any thoughts about how we move in that direction, not only for the metaverse but for all the technological innovations that we have the opportunity to unlock?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, just from my experience, is for context for everyone watching, is that so for my company Conduit, we've had the fortitude to really execute our vision how we want to do it. And that's been from a history of saying no to certain deals and deciding to raise money through our community and bootstrapping and
Mm-hmm.
really, really great. And so we've been able to pierce into both worlds, what both worlds are like and what the experience is, at
Mm-hmm.
least it's more color for sure. And so bringing
Mm-hmm.
it to this context is, I think you're gonna see. I mean, I think in terms of how we can utilize these opportunities is going to come down to. I know I said community already, but specifically, I think it's going to come down to really the influencers, the people that carry weight, sway in the African American diaspora community.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, I mean, I know, Bob, you've seen this. I know you've seen this where people who weren't in the blockchain, the second Jay-Z invested in it, they're like, "Oh, what's going on?" And
Mm-hmm.
then, of course, they're like years late.
Mm-hmm.
Forgive you guys, but we told you guys, we told you this years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
so and that's a primate thing, by the way. That's not just a human thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a book I was reading. It was saying how where they had these primates, these apes, and they had them try to introduce new norms into
Mm-hmm.
society. It's gonna blow you away. So they started with the the lowest caste, if you will, of apes, the ones that weren't not with the top, and it took
Mm-hmm.
them 2 years to get the norm through the society of apes.
Mm-hmm.
And after literally a couple of days, it faded away. It was whatever. But then they had the apes that were in top of the consider the primal apes, whatever you want to say, the top apes, and they learned this literally in an hour, and it lasted forever after that. I mean, years after that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the in that context, I think the influencer strategy is going to be really, 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 really important in terms of organizing people, bringing their attention to it. Um, but I think so. I think with that regard, it's going to be a question of um, educating people and breaking down, communicating what these concepts are to people.
Mm-hmm.
So, say I'm company X and I'm making this really cool metaverse product, and I want
Mm-hmm.
to use this influencer approach. I'm really going to have to find, especially I'm starting from very, very minimal resources, find people that are influencers are willing to work with me, obviously on a low budget. Number one,
Mm-hmm.
influencers have been a little bit kind of, no offense, influencers, you guys have been kind of spoiled, the last 10 years, through the TikToks and Instagram, and so it's become its own marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so you got that going on. So influencer strategy number will be really, really important. But two, again, is how you communicate it, especially in America, because America, part of our federalist structures, and the state is in charge of education. You're gonna get the MIT guy that understood it 5 years ago, but then you get the person from Florida. I'm from Florida, so I can talk a little garbage. Is that they might not understand it really quick, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And so the simpler idea, the way you communicate it, the better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think it's also going to require really some champions, some people like the Tyler Perrys and the Oprahs and etc. to really
Mm-hmm.
say, hey, I'm going to help introduce this into the world. I mean, look at like Obama in 2008. Remember when he did the Oprah interview?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Whoa, what? Okay, this guy is really a big deal. So it's really going to rely on that sort of talented tenth. Speaking back to Dubois about getting these ideas out here in a way that doesn't totally make us sellouts to the sort of traditional routes of fundraising like we've seen in the past.
I think that those are excellent insights and kind of a revisiting of the talented 10th philosophy, and some of it is the celebrated 10th, but there's also got to be this interaction with those who have the knowledge, can communicate effectively with those who have the voice. And I see it happening. And one of the things I've noticed is that our leading athletes and entertainers now have now become technology investors, and you've got people like Nas, who has a venture capital arm, and you've got LeBron, and a lot of these folks who've had access to the Silicon Valley pipeline and were able to get in early on some unicorns and build wealth, and now be able to go back and reinvest that wealth. So there is a capital base developing in that influencer space now, and I guess the onus is on the technologically savvy amongst us to be able to, as you said, communicate it in a clear way that breaks down what are the problems that the technology can solve, what are the roots that the technology now opens up. But I do believe that that process has already moved in a positive direction, but I think we need to hone that, whether we're talking about the metaverse, whether
Right.
we're talking about cryptocurrency and blockchain, quantum computing, medical breakthroughs, all of them. We need to have our voice heard, because our voice speaks to the real world problems. And one of the nice things about capitalism, and it gets, it gets its derision, but the fact is, if you can solve a problem in capitalism, you can create something that's sustainable.
Yeah.
But the key is, it has to be done in a way that it's not about a grab of resources, but it actually does benefit folks. So I think that we're probably going to wrap things up here. I think we at least got further down the road in terms of our understanding of the metaverse as the next generation of interaction between our network world and our so-called physical world. I don't want to say real world, because all of it is a real world, but I think that we number one need to have as much of an understanding about how the new uh, overlay on top of the real world operates, so that we can make it build and not be weaponized against us.
Right.
So I'm going to give you the final thoughts on this.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I would say to everybody out there is number one, is that this is a huge opportunity. Metaverse, we're living in a time period that historically, the internet, YouTube, Wikipedia, and now the metaverse. I mean, there's so much out there that we can utilize that 100 years ago we could not. And so I just want to remind everybody out there to utilize the opportunities in front of you, and be willing to craft out your own path of how to get to what you define as success. Success for you might mean everyone in the world using your product. It might mean you owning control of that product completely as much as you can. But whatever that means to you, is that there's different ways to do that. And I encourage you to look at different mediums to execute your vision, where to be flexible on the details, but to be really cemented on your vision. Be cemented on your vision. And with that, if you set your mind to something, you can do it. I believe in you guys. So, see ya.
So there you have it. We got the roadmap. It's still the same thing. We still have to work together as a village. We got to encourage STEM and STEAM in our kids. We got to encourage capital formation and wealth transfer so we have the resources to carry this stuff over the finish line. And we have to continue to love ourselves and love each other. So this has been Bob Ponce with Ryan Robinson on the Black Blockchain Summit panel about entering the metaverse, and enter it boldly and bring other folks with you. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Woo.
Thank you.